read a very interesting article by a man named Paul Gallen. This was in the forward. This fellow Paul Gallen. Well, we'll leave that to the end because I didn't find out to the end when I read the article. Or halfway through the article, whatever it is. The name of the article, I don't remember exactly, but it had in quotes, liberal, the word liberal in quotes, Jews, are basically, I don't remember the exact words, they're just as hypocritical as the Orthodox over this issue with gender equality and the kotel and so forth. Excuse me. Now, so many of us just live on different, before I get to this whole thing, so many of us just live on different wavelengths. We need to find some common ground. Because so much of arguments in the world are semantics, meaning we do have the same beliefs, but we express them in different ways. And so many things are that we have radically different beliefs, to the point where we're on totally different wavelengths. I mean, this morning I was listening to NPR, and they were discussing this issue of how the Senate could not pass a repeal and replace of Obamacare because a number of Republican senators backed out. Now, if you know anything about the history of the Senate, that's how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to, there's, could use it's somewhat Kabbalistic terminology, and I wouldn't be surprised, considering the early Masonic influences in the founding of the country, if there wasn't actually a Kabbalistic intent here as well. But the two houses of our federal legislature have almost a masculine and a feminine dynamic to them. In a sense, the House is the masculine House of the Congress, and the Senate is the feminine one, which is interesting because the Senate is the more prestigious one. And I think that's really true. At least from the Kabbalistic standpoint, there is a prestige to the feminine that's more earthly. We say in English about Mother Earth. Mother Nature, Mother Earth. There is the feminine aspect of physical reality. I'm not getting into this so properly, but the way between men and women, men are constantly moving aspects of humanity. Men produce millions of sperm. Women produce 1 egg a month. I remember Jerry Seinfeld, he had a bit about this, about how men are hunters and women are nesters, and we need both dynamics to have a stable society. If you have one without the other, there's an imbalance. And in this way, the Senate is the more feminine aspect. Meaning in the House, you're supposed to be running around. Everything's very quick. Each representative has to run every 2 years. As soon as he comes in, he or she comes in, he or she has to start thinking about, are they running again, and what are their plans if they do want to run again? How, because everything's so quick. And the Senate is, you're in the Senate for 6 years. And the other thing is the same thing. There are more Congress men and women in the House and fewer senators. Also, that same aspect. And the Senate is supposed to be a place almost of pregnancy, meaning that the seed that's germinated from the House is supposed to be incubated, in a sense, in the Senate, and grow and develop slowly. If it comes out too quickly, this baby will be premature and not ready to exist. So the Senate is supposed to be a place of deliberation and slowness. For a very good reason, so we don't rush into things too quickly. And this, I think it's enough with the masculine and feminine discussion. And that being said, where we find ourselves now, so there was a senator from Hawaii on NPR. She said unequivocally, healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And the Republicans are undermining this goal of recognizing healthcare as a right and not a privilege. Now, this comes down to a fundamental difference in worldviews, but also an issue of semantics and how to accomplish these things. Constitutionalist conservative view says that our natural rights are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, if we have a right to life, that would seem to indicate that health care might be a right because it's a right to life issue. But others say that yes, to save your life That's a right. Other aspects, for example, in Obamacare, we had things like birth control and things like this. These are not rights, these are privileges. The issue is, though, if we're paying for people's health care, we want to keep the population down, which is why it's this way to keep costs down. You know, this is the slippery slope of socialism, of left-wing policies, is that it becomes, even though they claim to be humanistic, it becomes the end anti-humanistic. It's a degrowth movement. Leads to like the ZPG movement. ZPG movements would not come from the right, they would come only from the left. We had them in China. They didn't really work, and they've been somewhat relaxed in recent years, but it led to slaughter of girls, baby girls, one after the other. Millions, maybe even billions of girls killed because of the ZPG movement in China. And also an imbalance of the number of men versus the number of women in China, which would solve that ZPG issue or lead to the end of their nation, or a great, in the next, I remember when I was a kid, they were telling us that what was going to happen in China was that the Chinese men would go to other countries to find wives. I don't know what's going on in China, but it's quite possible that I don't know, but it's possible that we have in Europe and Japan, where there's no interest to get married or to reproduce or anything, and there's no future in these countries because of not only left-wing policies, but left-wing ideologies and selfishness. People just don't want to keep things going. This is really connected to the next issue that I wanted to bring out. But perhaps these ideologies deserve to die because they are so ridiculous and they don't work. Now the thing is, so let's go back to, so when a Democrat says that healthcare is a right, they extend that to mean that to include birth control, to include things that perhaps even, I don't know, sex change operations and things like that. All right, maybe you could argue that this person is suicidal without this operation, and so it could save their life. That's a possible argument, but it could be a specious one because, and there's arguments on both sides about that. There does have to be a certain amount of compassion. But the thing is that there are, I think, the government, by granting nonprofit and tax-exempt status to charities, covers that. And the left-wing charities are just as welcome to these benefits as the right-wing charities are. Just the thing is, the left doesn't really believe in as much in charity. For the most part, there are some who do and some who don't. But, like, I remember hearing in high school how, like, Al Gore, they found out, his charitable donations for the year was something like $300. A man who's a millionaire, because he feels that the government should be the charity box and not the churches, not the people, not the institutions, even secular institutions and so forth, as opposed to the more right-wing views that, we had, by extending this, we have freedoms right-wing ideology, but they shouldn't be imposing their ideology anymore, than the right should be through government. These are issues that we have what to discuss. But someone on the right will say, well, no, healthcare is not a right. Life is a right. So if it's a life or death issue, that's a right. But you're still indebted unless there's forgiveness of that debt, meaning it's not free. Things cost money. I'll tell you like this, the big question, from when I was a little kid, this big ethical, moral question. We know it's wrong to steal, but what about stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving family? So the Jewish law answers that question. Most people, that's a dilemma. The Jewish law has a very simple answer to that. Because it's a life or death situation, you're required in that time, if there's no other means, if there's no permitted means to save this person's life, there is a requirement to steal, just like there's a requirement, for example, to break the Sabbath to break someone's life. It seems more obvious to most people. Of course you have to break the Sabbath to save a life. But that wasn't so obvious in the Maccabean times, historically. We should be aware of that. But there's something else. There's a caveat to that permission to steal to save someone's life, only to save someone's life and not for any other reason. Would be a permission to steal. And I think most people would accept that. But the caveat is that you have to pay back when you're able to. Now, you might not be able to, but if you're able to work it off, or you're able to pay for it, you did the right moral thing stealing at that time, but that doesn't absolve you of your obligation to pay. But the obligation comes when you're able to. That's a real world answer, and I think that's to me, I think that's an incredible answer to this big dilemma. Now, you're not allowed under other circumstances to steal and pay back afterwards, according to Jewish law. It's always, except for life or death, it's always forbidden to steal. Meaning you can't steal and even say, I'm going to give it back later. Not allowed to do that. But for a life or death situation, you're obligated to do whatever you can to save a life. But that doesn't absolve the debt. And so, no, healthcare is only a right for life and death situations. And as painful as that is, and there has to be compassion in that, but that does not absolve the debt unless the debt is forgiven for whatever other reason. It could be a compassionate reason, but the law does not assure this debt forgiveness, but the creditor could forgive the debt out of compassion. They should. They're doing the right thing. But are they obligated to do so? No. But if they do so, they're doing the right thing. Like there's a Mishnah discussing, for example, the forgiveness of debts on the sabbatical. And the Mishnah, it's in the end of Shvius, it says that even though the debt is forgiven by law, if the person wants to pay back the debt, he may do so, and it's a good thing to do. And it compares it to a situation, if someone owes a debt to a convert, and this convert, all of his children converted with him. By Jewish law, they are not his heirs. And so the regular heir, the natural heir, who was born Jewish, there would be the obligation to return the debt to the natural heir. But because a convert is considered a new soul, he's born again, by the strict letter of the law, he has no connection to his ancestors, even if they also converted. However, this legally is not a natural heir, but if you treat him like a natural heir, you go above and beyond the letter of the law. It says Ruach Chachamim Neichemenu. The attitude of the sages is happy with such a person, because it's the right thing to do. You're not obligated to do it. They cannot force you to do it by law, but it's the right thing to do. And so too in a similar situation, there is no obligation for a hospital to forgive the debts of the poor, but it's the right thing to do. And so that's why hospitals might have charitable funds and so forth in order to deal with this, but it's at their will. The government can't force them to do so, and such things should be encouraged but not enforced, perhaps. Certainly that would be the point of view of Jewish. Perhaps. I can't say that with certainty, because but also in the sense, I remember some years ago, a friend of mine, a Reform rabbi, passed away. He was arguing, he showed a Rambam, that Jewish law mandates health care for the poor. My answer to that would be, well, there's a separation of church and state, according to you. So just because the religion mandates this doesn't mean that the government has to provide this. It means that the religious communities have an obligation to provide this, and we're thankful that the government provides tax-exempt status for us to be able to do such things. But this is the job of the church, the synagogue, the mosque. It's not the job of the government. That would be my argument to him. I, out of respect, he's twice my age, I refrained from giving that answer, although I thought it in my heart. But the thing is I heard Rand Paul a few weeks ago said something brilliant. He said, we do want to provide health care to those in need. But there's a difference between health care and health insurance. I mean, you have to use common sense. What does insurance mean? If you provide insurance to someone with a pre-existing condition, then it is not insurance. It's charity, and it's a good thing to give. But that's not insurance, and it undermines the whole system of insurance. If someone did not buy fire insurance, and then their house went on fire, and they said, well, I want to buy, do they call like Rand Paul said, do you call the fire department or do you call the insurance agent? And if you would call the insurance agent and he would ask, well, all right, what kind of policy? Well, how's the fire right now? He would laugh at you. Meaning insurance is something that you buy before you have a problem, not when you have a problem. Then it's not insurance. And of course, this is unfortunate, and we should hope and pray that no one should have to suffer with such things. Make sure there's no fires. We pray and hope, but things have to be done in there's ways these things work. Things are not, if you would call the insurance company when you already have the problem, then they would just have to charge you the full price. It's not insurance anymore. And Rand Paul said brilliantly, I mean, this is how I would word it, instead of an insurance package, particularly when we're talking about people are on Medicaid who don't pay anything or who pay very little. Medicaid should not be paying insurance. Medicaid should be paying costs. And that would eliminate, and there should be reform, tort reform and so forth, to bring down the actual costs. And these things can be taken care of in a pragmatic way. But instead, the insurance companies are making money. And that's ridiculous. They shouldn't be making money off the backs of the poor or off the backs of the taxpayers. The insurance, and the thing is, like, this whole story with Senator Cruz proposed that the insurance company should be given the freedom to sell any type of insurance they want, as long as they also include an Obamacare. Meaning, basically, if you like your Obamacare, you can keep your Obamacare. The answer that they have is, well, that's going to drive up the costs. Well, who said that? Was that an independent auditor? Or was that the insurance companies? Of course insurance companies are going to say that because they like their monopoly that they have. All right. I think what I'm going to do is end this video now. And then make the next video about what I have to say about this article that I mentioned at the beginning, because we're already about the half-hour mark. So we'll move on from here. So think about these things. I'd like to hear arguments back and forth, because yes, I think everyone can agree that a certain measure of health care is a right and not a privilege. But what does that mean exactly? Because how much of it is a right, and what is health care as opposed to health insurance? And which aspect? Because I remember Larry Arnn, he said people think that the highest quality health care is a right. And he said, but that's not. Meaning there are aspects of health care that Larry Arnn, who's very right-wing, obviously, would agree to be a right. And then there are others that are privileged. All right. Well, that's that I think. What else can we say about this? There is an issue of semantics, and there's also an issue of worldview, both. And we have to at least find the middle ground so we can have open discussion, because at this point there's no discussion, there's no dialogue, there's only, what are you saying? How can you say that? Are you crazy? What? You want to kill people? On both sides. Because really this is a life or death issue. You know, I mean, I think the story of Charlie Gard shows that left-wing approach is deadly. But then the left will say that the right-wing approach is deadly. And doing nothing is deadly. I don't know. It's so let's take a break from this now. So we have what to discuss on both sides, and we have to examine both sides. I mean, I think the fact, everyone's so frustrated. Well, why did Mike Lee back out of voting for this? Well, some new facts were presented to him, or new figures. Maybe they're not facts. I question the factuality of what the insurance companies are claiming. I think something like that should be examined by an independent by an independent auditor. But I think it's wise to say, let's step back for a minute. Let's examine this more. Let's not rush into anything. Back to what I was saying before, meaning that the House is the place of everything going quick, and the Senate is the place to stop and think and not to rush into things. So I'm not so frustrated by the fact that it hasn't been passed yet, because things like this have to take time. It's not quite that easy. All right. In my next video, I'm going to talk about a more parochial Jewish issue. I think these are. All right. Thank you. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe.